This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Out for Blood. The author is Ryan Steck. It is a Matthew Redd thriller. Winters in Montana can be deadly, but it wasn't the cold that was killing Matthew Redd. Gavin Kline, Executive Assistant Director of the FBI's Intelligence Directorate, is escorting a high-value prisoner with the intel to bring down a global conspiracy when their plane comes under attack. In the aftermath, much of Kline's team is dead, but he recovers a phone from a member of the hit team that reveals another attack is imminent. This time they're going after the man who was instrumental in capturing the prisoner and foiling their plans, Matthew Redd. When Redd learns he's in the crosshairs, he sends his family into hiding and heads for the mountains. He might be outnumbered, but the hit team will have to hunt him down on his own turf. With a snowstorm bearing down on Montana and no help in sight, Redd fights for survival in the harshest conditions. But when they take the fight to his hometown, he'll need all his allies at his back to save what he holds most dear. Ryan Steck is an editor and author and the founder and editor-in-chief of The Real Book Spy. Ryan has been named an online influencer by Amazon and is a regular columnist at Crime Reads. TheRealBookSpy.com has been endorsed by #1 New York Times bestselling authors Mark Greaney, C.J. Box, Kyle Mills, Daniel Silver, and Brad Thor. All of those, by the way, all of those authors have been on this program, and many others, too. A resident of beautiful Michigan, along with his wife and their 6 kids, Steck cheers on his beloved Detroit Tigers and Lions during the rare moments when he's not reading or talking about books on social media. Happy to have, for the very first time, Ryan Steck on this program. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what was the inspiration behind this book?
Well, I'd always wanted to write this story, to be honest with you. I would have led with this one. This would have been #1 in the series if I thought I was ready years ago to write it. So I think I always respected the craft of writing. Being an editor for 14 and a half years, I've seen writers get better over time. And I knew I needed the writing chops to pull this one off. I also knew that where I wanted to introduce my hero, Matthew Redd, this wasn't the starting point for him. When you first meet him in Fields of Fire and then Lethal Range, those are my first 2 books. And you don't have to read the first 2 books to read this one, by the way. I do try to write them all so they can kind of stand alone. But when you first meet Redd in Fields of Fire, he's a former Marine Raider. This guy's a loner, doesn't really have friends, doesn't talk a lot. He's got to find who he is, which he does a lot in book 2 in Lethal Range. Well, now he's happy. Now he's running this cattle ranch in Montana with his wife and their son. He's got everything he's really ever wanted out of life. And that's dangerous, because once you're happy and you've got everything, now you've got more to lose. And that was where I wanted to show Matthew Redd, is this guy who's been a warrior, who's been to hell and back. Now he's settled down and he's happy. How far will he go when everything that he now loves and has is threatened? And that was sort of the jump off point for me as a writer.
Ryan, you're from Michigan, as I mentioned in the introduction. Why Montana, and why is that setting so important for Out for Blood?
Well, listen, I love the lone wolf operators. When I sat down to write Fields of Fire and introduce Matthew Redd, I told my agent, this is going to be like Mitch Rapp meets Joe Pickett, Vince Flynn meets C.J. Box. And I remember he goes, "What's that look like?" And I said, "Give me a year. Let's find out." The reality is a lone wolf operator is my favorite kind of hero. Jack Reacher, Jason Bourne, James Bond. We never see those guys out west. Very rarely do we ever see those types of characters out west. And the thing about that is it's kind of the perfect setting for them. So you could say you're a lone wolf and you're operating all on your own, but out in Montana, you really are operating out by yourself. On a good day in Montana, backup is hours away. On a bad day, you could be days away from anyone coming to help you. So to me, that was sort of like everything you wanted in the terrain and in the environment for a lone wolf operator to operate in. It raises the stakes, the tension, and all that. I also just love Montana. I think anyone who's ever been there, it's hard not to fall in love with it. There's something so connected, I think, to us when we get off grid, being out west like that, where you look up and the stars are, unthinkably bright and gorgeous. You just don't get that here. And, I live in the city. I love Michigan, but I felt like a guy like Matthew Redd would operate better in Montana.
Did you spend a lot of time in Montana as part of your research?
Not enough.
Hmm.
I always want to go back. I always need to go back. This one's funny because Out for Blood takes place during one of the worst winter storms in Montana history. And I remember my publisher had kind of said to me, "Hey, do you need to get out there during a winter to see what it's like with all the snow?" And I was like, "Well, not really. I mean, I'm from Michigan. If there's anything I know, it's snow. We get bad winters over here. I'm not that far from Lake Michigan. We get that nice lake effect snow. So, in fact, when I sat down to write Out for Blood, um, we had a polar vortex come through Michigan. I don't even know what a polar vortex is. I think it's just a fancy way of saying really horrible snowstorm. And when you go to write about a blizzard and these conditions, I mean, I'm writing 100,000 word thriller, right? I'm on page 1, and once you've referred to snow as cold and wet and white, you're running out of ways to describe this stuff. So I would walk right out into my backyard and stand in the polar vortex and sort of just take it all in and run inside and write down what it felt like and what I heard and what I sensed and so that became its own unique research. But as far as Montana, no, I mean I would love to get out there more. It's definitely something I'd like to do. There's more places to explore. There's a few different settings, parts of Montana I'd like to set a book. So I definitely have more research trips coming up for sure. And I love it out there, man. I wish I could pull the trigger and just move out there.
Mm. What was the most exciting part of writing this story, Ryan?
Um, well, like I said, it was a story I always wanted to write. So being able to finally sit down and do it was really exciting for me. The book you sort of read, the flat copy, the product description on this thing. Red is a guy that just wants to be left alone. He just wants to run this ranch with his wife and their son, and they got friends, and he wants a normal life. He doesn't want to be the warrior anymore. But he's at a family dinner, and that's sort of how the book opens. He gets a call that there's a team of killers less than an hour away from his front door, and they're coming to kill him and everyone he loves. And he's got to figure out how to stay alive and protect everything and everyone he loves until help can get there. And like I said, on a good day, help is ours. On a bad day, like the worst storms in Montana history, you're talking no backup for days. So Red sends his family in one direction, and then he heads on horseback up into the mountains in the middle of the snowstorm, hoping he can use the elements and the terrain to his advantage. And I think once I got going and the family was sort of in one direction, Red's by himself on this mountain with a team of killers hot on his heels, that was as much fun for me to write, hopefully, as people have reading it.
You have described Matthew Red as being with you for a long time. You touched on this a little bit earlier. How has he changed from his original incarnation until now? And how has your writing evolved in this series now with book 3?
Yeah, I mean, so he's married now. He's got his better half. His wife Emily Red knows him better than he knows himself. Super helpful to me because Red is a man of few words. Doesn't talk a lot. In book 1, he's pretty reserved and proceeds everything with caution. He's a little bit loosened up now. He's got a wife that understands and can fill in the gaps. Even when he doesn't understand his own thoughts, she's able to make sense of that. That's taken right out of my real life. I'm married. We have 6 kids, and my wife knows me better than I know myself for sure. To this day, I will put stuff on a grocery list, and she'll say, "Babe, you don't like that." And I'm like, "I think I do." And she's like, you don't. And she's right. I'm wrong. So I wanted to show those types of things. That's where the writing has gotten fun for me. I always want these to be big action-packed stories, but I also want those smaller scenes that are like connective tissue. I love CJ Box. I'm a huge fan. I'm actually a character in his series. And I realized one day my favorite scenes of the Joe Pickett series are not necessarily the action scenes. It's the family dinners. It's just seeing Joe Pickett with his wife and his daughters. And I love that. And that's what I know, having a wife and 6 kids. So that's been really fun for me to write. Slip in more of me, more of what I know, my day-to-day experiences and observations through Red, who's now having a lot of those same experiences and observations himself.
Yeah, CJ was just on this podcast, and I just finished his great book,
Yeah.
the latest one, too. Which character are you, by the way?
So I am Deputy Ryan Steck. I was introduced in Vicious Circle. I'm a big fan. I've been a fan of his for a long time. I've covered him for a long time as the Real Book Spy. We're friends now. He endorsed my first book and told me to start calling him Chuck. So it's pretty weird. I've always called him CJ Box, and now he's Chuck. And man, he's my favorite living author for sure.
This book, Out for Blood, continues the series exploration of the difference between family and relatives. How do these themes impact the characters in the book?
I'm a big believer. So my first three kids are adopted. I'm a big believer in that blood makes you relatives, but you choose your family. And I think there's a big difference in that. You know, I have relatives that I've not seen in years, some decades, and we're talking aunts, uncles, first cousins. But I have close best friends that are like family to me, that are here for, holidays, and we spend Christmas together. I think that's important, and it's a message that I really wanted to hit on and make a central theme of my books in the series. And you see that in Out for Blood, definitely, when everyone sort of comes together in the heart of this fictional town called Wellington, Montana, to sort of defend what's theirs, as one. And that was important for me to show. I never want to be heavy-handed or preachy with themes in my book. I think as a thriller writer, your number one job is to entertain the reader. So that's always my goal. I want to keep you up past your bedtime. I want you to read this thing in one sitting if I can. But sure, man, I think if you look deeper, sometimes there's a few messages, and that's one that's pretty near and dear to my heart.
Let's talk about dogs. The dog in the book is based on your Rottweiler, Rubble. How does the introduction of man's best friend influence the story?
Well, this one in a big way. I won't spoil it. I'd say you have to pick it up to find out the answer to that one. But, when Red looks around, I need people that I could trust around him. He needs people he can trust around him. His best friend's name is Michael Durhammer. That's my best friend. His house is just right across the street. Our houses look at each other. I've fictionalized him in the story. And one day when I was outlining Out for Blood and I realized Red's going alone up this mountain on horseback, I thought he needs a companion. And I looked down and my 130-pound Rottweiler Rubble is snoring at my feet. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to give him my dog. And I've always been a dog lover, but I've never had one quite so loyal. My dog doesn't like when people hug me. So if my wife or kids hug me for too long, he'll try to break it up. He's super jealous, but he's very loyal and obedient. And he was kind of like the perfect companion / weapon to give Red when he's alone on this mountain.
This is the third book in this action-packed series. How do you keep coming up with fresh ideas, and how do you ensure the excitement remains vibrant throughout the series?
I think I just feel so blessed to get to tell stories for a living and support my family, that it's still really fun for me. I'm sure there's a time where it becomes stressful. In addition to this series, I've taken over the late Ted Bell's Alex Hawk series. That was hard. Writing my first Hawk book was exhilarating and stressful, but exciting. And there was a lot of pressure, but it was still fun. I'm still really thankful that I get to do this. And I run out of ideas. Like, I have so many ideas. I have to keep them all in journals, and I'm always writing something down that I want to use later. I think for me, the goal is, you can't always go bigger than the last book. You can't always be saving the world in a more action-packed way, but you can raise stakes in different ways, like with the characters, right? So I'm speaking a little bit I don't want to give anything away, right? So I'm being a little mysterious there, but I think dynamics between characters really raises the stakes in a lot of ways, especially once readers sort of connect with these characters. And so, yeah, man, I really have a lot of fun writing these stories. And I'm so thankful I get to do it, that right now it hardly feels like work. I think that's the key.
Did you always want to become a writer?
Oh, no. No, if you'd have told younger me that I would someday be an author, I would have laughed at you. I never would have believed that. I was 15 years old in a creative writing class in high school, and we had an intern, and she kept assigning us like homework for weekends that none of us would do. So one Friday she came in and she said, "Hey guys, go home, write whatever you want. There could be action, there could be swearing, I don't care. Just go write anything you want." So, Steve, come on, I'm a 15-year-old kid, man. If you give me that inch, I'm going to take it 18 miles. I went home and I wrote the most vulgar, action-packed, just every other word was a curse word. And I came in, I didn't know it was a peer-to-peer assignment. And I remember the look on the kid's face when he had to read mine out loud in front of the class. And he kept stopping, like, should I be reading this? And so what I didn't know was there was a part of me that took that very seriously. Character development, setting scenes, trying to engage the reader and hook them at the end of a chapter. Things that I do now and that I've helped clients with as an editor, I didn't realize I was trying to do then without even knowing what I was doing. Well, the way that story goes is I wrote about a 15-year-old kid named Matthew Red who worked as a vigilante to protect his school from an attack. The next day I got called down to the principal's office, which was like not a new thing for me. I was in trouble a lot as a kid, but I come down and my parents were there. The superintendent was there, principal, vice principal, my English teacher, and the intern. And I thought this is going to be bad. And they had my short story and they said, look, you know, you cannot write this. You cannot do this in school. Like he's going to be suspended. And my parents were old school. They were like, if you're in trouble at school, you're in trouble at home. So I was in trouble in school and home all the time. But this is one time my parents were smart enough to go, well, time out. What was the assignment? And so they fought for me and they said, look, he might have went overboard, but he did the assignment. And the school, you know, I'm over there really cheering my parents on, like, get him, mom, get him, dad. And it didn't work at all. They ended up suspending me for a week, but it was the one time I got in trouble at school. I was not in trouble at home. So you flash forward 20 something years. And now I'm married and I've been editing for a while, running the book Spy. I want to start writing my own stories. I had the story in mind. I needed the hero. And so I started thinking, I went back to Matthew Red and I thought, what was that 15-year-old kid up to? What would he look like as an adult? And so I just reimagined him and dropped him into this universe I'd created. And it all worked out. I got pretty lucky. My principal back then is now my kid's principal in high school. So he's a fan of the books. He reads them. And it's a big running joke because every time I see him, he says, how's it going? And I say, pretty good. Matthew Red got me a week off school when I was 15 and a couple book deals. So I think it all worked out.
That's a great story. How can aspiring authors, Ryan, make their characters come alive?
So I think people always say, write what you know. And I think that's a mistake. Write what you want to read. If you're interested, then I think the reader will be too. And if I had to write what I know, I mean, I'd be writing about, you know, middle-aged critics and editors that are sitting around with a bunch of kids doing nothing. That'd be my life, right? I think write what interests you. And I think that's the key. When it comes to characters, they need to have relatable traits that we all understand. That is why I love those dinner scenes with the Joe Pickett series and CJ Box. He does them so well because we all see ourselves in that. You know, I don't know what it's like to be running up a mountain in the middle of a blizzard like Red is facing in this book with a team of killers on my heels. I would be dead by nightfall for sure. I'd be the first to admit that. But I do know what it's like to hope that you're home in time for dinner and to put your kids to bed. So I think it's always a balancing act of, sure, you know, you want this hero to be someone who's really capable, who can do these things, but there needs to be relatable traits as well.
Are you hard at work on the next novel? And if so, can you give us a sneak peek into what it's about?
Yeah, so I've turned in Red 4. I've turned that one in. I turned it in last October. I did my first Alex Hawk novel in Ted Bell's series. It's called Ted Bell's Monarch. That comes out March 25th, 2025. Red 4 will come out next summer. We're just going to be announcing the title pretty soon. You know, what can I say about it? I can say Montana's on fire. The whole wildfire that dominated the news last year, it was pretty eerie. I had set out to write this book. Just like Out for Blood, day one, we had like a blizzard in Michigan as I'm writing this blizzard scene. Day one, I went to write Red 4. I was sitting outside and the smoke from the Canadian wildfires was pushing down into the US. It was over Michigan. And I'm sitting outside in this hazy smoke and it's thick. You can't breathe. And I thought, this is odd. You know, I've 2 years in a row, I sort of nailed it. I think my next book, Red's going to be just money raining from the sky, and we'll see if it happens. But Montana's on fire. Not everything is as it seems. There's a team of smoke jumpers who are killed, and Red is sent in to investigate what happened in the middle of this wildfire, and quickly uncovers a pretty shocking situation that forces him to go on the run and try to protect someone. And it's a big book. I'm really proud of it. I'm excited, and I think my readers will really like it.
Are you an outliner or a pantser?
It's a great question. So I hate outlining. I'm a big hypocrite because as an editor, I tell all my clients, hey, you got to outline. And that's because I want to be involved early. I want to be able to look at it, look for, red flags, holes, things like that. So I took this artistic approach, Steve, on book 2. When I signed my first book deal, I turned in Fields of Fire. When I was supposed to go write Lethal Range, my publisher asked for the outline. And I said, I don't do outlines. I'm just going to write it. I'll turn it in. We could talk about it, but I don't do outlines. And my agent called me immediately and goes, well, you have like a really big payment tied to your outline, so you might want to do an outline. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll do an outline right now. I love outlining. What are you talking about? So I outline, but it's not a lot. It's maybe 6 pages of just sort of like sequential events that are going to take place within the story. I don't always know everything, but I always know how the story's going to end. I write the epilogue first. I figure if I write the last chapter first and I know where I'm ending, I just go back to the beginning of the story and I just tell it until I get to that point and I'm done.
He's got a lot more to come. He's got 2 coming out next year. The one out for this summer is Out for Blood. The author is Ryan Steck. Also, check out therealbookspy.com as well. He's the founder and editor-in-chief of that. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
And this is Speaking of Writers.